I'm sorry.
And this is Elegy from the band Amorphis.
Yep.
Every time I hear the word Amorphis, I always think about Kai. Is this Kai? Who's this
Well,
from?
it's the Epic Underground.
Epic Underground. What is that? Is that the name of the song?
You know what? I went with their link.
Okay. So, click the link. Oh, okay. Track number 5, My Ken Keel. Okay. So this is the Epic Underground. There are numerous ways to get your song reviewed, dear listener. This is my favorite option. It is the Alliance option, where you take a bunch of people who have similar musical interests. You get them all together. They get points. They pull those points, and then they influence what songs get reviewed. So this is Elegy from Amorphis. Now, that's a community option. I love it because there's a nice little underground community they have there. A beautiful community headed up by the big homie Drew. And so that's how you get your song reviewed. The other way is the partner tier, $125, get you shot up straight to the head of the line. This
You can do that through
Elegy.
Patreon or PayPal. Links are in the description.
For timely, topical, political commentary, you can hit us up at Middle America with Vid and Sorry. And that's all we have for now, ladies and gents. Let's go. This is Amorphis Elegy. This should be very interesting. so I figured it out. So Elegy is the name of the album, okay? And My Teal is the 5th song on that record.
Okay. When this song was going on, all of a sudden I remember Kai sent that book, we called it the Cavala. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it wrong.
Yeah.
But in that book, there was a story about a character that created an instrument out of it was something that was in the water.
Some animal.
Well, I don't know if it was...
It's a whale or a fish or something.
I thought it was some sort of a whale, but I don't know. And he created the instrument, and I think some weird thing happened to it. I can't really remember. But I remember it being from that book.
Yeah, and I think you're right. It says right there. They lie, they talk utter nonsense. The music reckoned that the kentiel, it's some musical instrument, was fashioned by a god out of great pike shoulders from a water dog's hooked bones. It was made from the grief. So, yeah, that's where it came from. But what's interesting is he's saying that
I think something bad happened before he got there, but I can't remember what it was.
He's saying that's nonsense.
The song?
Well, no, it says they talk utter nonsense. Who say that music reckoned that the kentiel was fashioned by a god. He's saying that's nonsense.
Oh.
Which is very, it's like, I don't know how people, I don't really know. I don't really know how Swedish or Finnish people look at those stories.
Yeah.
Do they just look at it as part of their history? Or, is this sort of like an oral history of traditions that are passed down that everybody kind of doesn't believe happen in real life? Or are there people who believe in it like a religion?
Well,
and are they looking? Go ahead.
I don't think they believe it, because maybe they do, but the story was very fanciful. The stuff that would happen.
More fanciful than the stuff that we read in the Bible?
Oh, absolutely. There was one story where some character gets killed and chopped into a bunch of pieces and thrown into the water, and then the woman creates a rake and rakes and recreates the character.
Oh.
Stuff like that, where that's not gonna happen.
Retelling of the Isis horror stuff. Because it's the same thing, the body gets split up and thrown into the river, and whatever.
I think she finds his...
Yeah, his phallic. Yeah. That's the Isis Horus story.
Yeah.
It's the same one. Okay.
It's stuff like that.
So I don't know if a person would look at this and go, "How dare you?" or if they would say, "Yeah, of course that's nonsense." I'm not sure. Kai, you're gonna have to comment on this one, my guy.
The fact that this guy is saying truly they lie, they talk utter nonsense, makes me think that some people must believe it.
Yeah,
Otherwise, if everybody knew that it wasn't true, then you would just,
Yeah. He's saying...
celebrate the fact of the story. So, it was super interesting. I loved the book. I read it start to finish with the kids. They loved it too.
Yeah. It's belly out of hard days, its soundboard from endless woes, strength gathered from torment, and its pegs from other ills. Truly they lie, they talk utter nonsense. So it not play will not rejoice at all. Music will not to please give off the right sort of joy, for it was fashioned from tears, molded from sorrow. I think what he's saying, and again, English is not these guys' first language. So in my opinion, they did a damn good job at it. It's always funny, people will send me an email and they'll say, "Sorry for the broken English." I'm like, your English is better than my
I know.
German or whatever it is you guys
I'm just
are.
amazed that someone can speak more than one language.
Yeah, you guys, and speak it well enough to actually put it to music. That's the other thing. That's extremely highbrow stuff. So shout out to Amorphis for that. I think what he's saying is, so in the story, the musical instrument has been forged based on, a conflict. The god versus this, whatever.
But I think, like I said, I think that some tragedy or something happens, and then that's what kind of inspires him to do something.
So the god did it, based on some conflict. And so what he's saying is, the specific story is nonsense, but the music was born out of pain and sorrow. For it was fashioned from tears and molded from sorrow. He's saying human sorrow actually created, the musical instrument, not, some supernatural being. And I think it was important for him to say that because he's a musician. And so, especially if you're a metal musician, the impetus for writing usually comes from some sort of conflict or suffering. So I think what he wants to do is like take the mythology away, not because he wants to abandon his past, but to say, hey, you know, we're missing a sort of one of the pinnacles of human existence, which is really interesting because when you think about the biblical narrative as far as the origin of music goes, it's very, very pedestrian. You know, it talks about,
well,
I think it was it Genesis 4 or Genesis 5 where it talks about Tubal-Cain or whatever, and he was the father of all those who play stringed instruments and yada, yada, yada. So music, but of course, there is conflict implied because the musical instruments came outside of the garden, and so there's a lot of, you know, and then it's also mentioned after the Cain and Abel incident. And you could piece together that they probably had some sort of conflict because, you know, it's after Cain and before the flood. So
of course they had conflict.
Obviously it was conflict, but that's not given as the reason for that. It just says these guys created the musical instruments, then it goes on and says these guys did agriculture, yada, yada, yada. It's very pedestrian. It's not very dramatic.
Yes. Except that why didn't they create those in the garden? You know, they didn't. Everything was good in the garden. And then they get outside of the garden, everything has been, and then that's where the instruments come. It just makes sense.
Yeah, I don't know. Because there was music before there was a fall in the garden.
What do you mean?
Well, I mean,
In heaven?
Well, yeah. And there's going to be music afterwards. So all I'm saying is the direct contents of the text doesn't have, like I said, it's rather pedestrian for something that's pretty significant to the human experience, right? Like, I like that story better than the Bible story, which is.
You would like it even more if you heard the context around it.
I don't know how I feel about that, but that's one of the things actually as a kid that used to kind of disappoint me about the Bible was that there were some things that I thought were really very important in human history, and there's just this sort of, oh yeah, he did that. I'm like, what are you talking about? This is amazing, and you know, it just didn't seem to matter. You know what I mean? And like that's, of course, now that I'm older, you know, I'm like, well, you know, that kind of smacks of that's one of the reasons I actually believe that the Bible is actually the Word of God, because it has these sort of pedestrian sort of, oh yeah, by the way, this happened, which is how kind of historians deal with specific issues. Like a lot of historians are just like, oh yeah, this happened and there's this period. It's very academic and very like, you know.
Yeah, I think also that when you have, for instance, if you have major events, things that are big events are not like, oh god, I'm having a hard time explaining what I'm saying. Like if for instance, if I slapped you in the face right now, that would be extremely shocking because I've literally never done that to you before. But if I hit you every single day in your face, then that's not really something like, if there was like, but I killed somebody, like even if I slapped you in the face every single day, that's not really that big of a deal because I killed somebody. You know what I'm saying? Like, so in this, yeah, the way that music came about might have been something super significant, but there are things that are of more significance in the Bible that maybe, you know, maybe the music thing is not as big of a thing when you're talking about a virgin birth, or you're talking, you know what I'm saying?
Well, the music thing was in the context of the descendants of Cain, and so I would take way too long to unpack all that, but it is extremely significant that it's the descendants of Cain who actually are the first culture builders mentioned in the scripture. So they're the ones that build the cities. They're the ones that built the first city. They're the ones that Jabal is the father of those who dwell in tents and raise livestock. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all those who play the harp and the flute. Tubal-Cain, a forger of every implement of bronze and iron. So, and then you've got, you know, Lamech, who is a poet. So it's very, very significant that in the biblical narrative, that on the one hand, it's this sort of disinterest pedestrian, oh yeah, by the way, they did this, this, and that. But on the other hand, they're in a larger context of even though Cain is a bad guy and his family's on the bad lineage, they're still created in the image of God, and because of that, they're still able to create all this industry and all of this art and all these things that it's God's basically crediting Cain's line with bringing us all that stuff.
Right. Yeah.
And so that is extremely significant that it came from the bad line, and it's clear that in Genesis 4, Cain and his family are projected as being horrible. They're terrible. As a matter of fact, there's a theory I used to believe that when it says the sons of God saw the daughters of men that were fair, was that the sons of God was a godly line of Seth, and then they saw the sons of men, which was Cain's lineage, and they intermarried with Cain's lineage, and that's what precipitated the flood, because Cain's lineage corrupted the godly line of Seth.
Huh.
So
yeah, but how would that be giants?
Well, right, which is why I no longer hold that position among other things, but I mean it was Augustine's interpretation, so I generally go with Augustine's interpretation on everything.
I love some Augustine.
I do. I love me some Augustine. So yeah, it's extremely significant that in the biblical narrative that number one, there's not a lot of mythological things attached to it, but on the other hand, that it's accredited to the bad guys, and throughout the Bible, musicianship, harp, flute, all that stuff is almost universally looked upon as a positive thing. Metallurgy is always looked upon as a positive thing. As a matter of fact, the Israelites were subjected to the Philistines because the Philistines had metallurgy and they didn't. So it's just, and then obviously, agricultural advancements and technology obviously was also almost universally looked upon as positive in the Old Testament. So all these positive things came from the evil line of Cain, and it's God's way of saying, hey, Cain was a horrible dude, but he was still an image bearer of God, and when image bearers of God get together, they can come up with really amazing stuff. And so it's just really interesting comparing and contrasting, different groups. But I think what Amorphis is saying here is that music comes from the human spirit, and it's in the context of conflict. And I agree with you. I think conflict is implied in Genesis 4, especially after Cain and Abel, the Cain and Abel incident, especially because Cain says, whoever finds me will kill me. So they're clearly birthed in the context of conflict, but there's no connection between conflict and music here directly. It's only by implication, whereas Amorphis is saying, no, this came out of human suffering and human pain, and we needed an outlet, and that's where we created music. However, so it not play will not rejoice at all. Music will not play to please, give off the right sort of joy, for it was fashioned from tears and molded from sorrow. I'm not sure I agree specifically with what he's saying here, because he seems to put music as in contrast with joy. So it will not play, will not rejoice at all. Music will not play to please or give off the right sort of joy, because it was fashioned from tears and molded from sorrow.
Well, I think some types of music is like that. I think that there are some types of music that you're not going to get joy from. Like, you can relate with certain types of songs were fashioned from such pain and sorrow that you can relate to it, and it may bring healing to you, but it doesn't cause you to rejoice. There are some songs that are created in such a way, and they are birthed from joy, and from that joy you rejoice.
Right, but there doesn't seem to be any room for that second thing that you talked about. It just seems to be kind of monolithic there, which again, if you're in metal, 95% of the music you're making does not sprout from when you had a good day with your mom and she took you to get an ice cream. Like, there's not a lot of metal songs about that. It's about your mom took you to an ice cream and then she died in a car accident on the way home. You know what I mean? So I see what you're saying. It's kind of one of those both and situations. But it's a very, very interesting take on music and where it began, and I'm always fascinated with people who can reach back to the time of their fathers, their forefathers, where they came from, and have that solid ground. And at the same time, I think it's very, very interesting to me that he's repudiating the mythological aspect of it. And I think, being a musician, I think that's very near and dear to his heart, that he doesn't want that mythologized, because I think every musician kind of feels it's really interesting because it's a fraternity of sorts. Like you run into another guitar player, it doesn't matter how good or bad you are with the instrument, like I texted Jay, I'm like, yo, I'm gonna send you some tracks, Jay, so we can I feel like me and Jay are like at the same level guitar wise, but it is sort of a fraternity, and you do feel. I remember the first time I read that in the Bible, like the first time I noticed that about Cain's descendants, and I remember being like, because I always identified with the bad guys in the Bible, that's the other thing. So I'm like, oh, okay, I'm one of Cain's descendants. I'm playing some guitar. All right, let's do it. This is for you, my guy. So, and he was, obviously not on my team, but there it is. So I think that's like, this is a song like specifically for musicians.
Yeah.
And he's very, very connected to that. So shout out to the big homie. What did you get the song?
Sonically wasn't really a fan of it. I liked that they used that story in here. So an 8.
Yeah, kudos to you for remembering that story.
Well, I really liked that book.
Yeah.
I love mythical stuff.
Yeah. It's an 8.5. I was expecting like a more, like a bigger sound and more, whatever from that, because that's usually what we get from Amorphis. Still a good solid song, and obviously very interesting subject matter. So 8.5 from me. There you are, dear listener. So the moral of the story is be like Cain and play an instrument.
My God.
Not after you murder your brother.
Yeah.
The murder your brother part is bad, but other than that, build industry, build cities, create all that jazz. Vin out.
Sorry out.
Gone.